everyone, welcome to Audiobookish. This is an audiobook review and discussion podcast. My name is Fahed Ram and I'm joined by Poppy Knight.
Hello.
And today we are going to be reviewing a podcast called Spirit Box Radio. It's an immersive horror audio drama. Atmospheric and engaging, Spirit Box Radio is an audio drama which will lull you into a false sense of security before pulling the rug from under your feet. If you love the creeping sense of unease of the Magnus archives, the weird whimsy of Welcome to the Night Vale, and the LGBTQ plus representation from the Hallowoods, you'll love Spirit Box Radio. Spirit Box Radio is the winner of the podcast Best Fiction Podcast Awards 2021 and a finalist in the 2021 Audioverse Awards. It's about Sam Henfield, who is the unlikely host of Spirit Box Radio, a show for witches, arcanists, and the magically inclined. Sam took over the show after the mysterious disappearance of his mother, the illustrious Madame Marie, a renowned psychic. No penchant for the arcane arts, Sam struggles to find his feet. As he does, he discovers that Spirit Box Radio may be haunted by something much worse than ghosts, secrets. It releases, well, we're reviewing season 1, but it says on their website they release every Thursday at 3 o'clock UK time, and their tagline is Tune in, get spooky. Do you want to talk about Spirit Box Radio and the author Pippin Eira Major?
Yes, so Spirit Box Radio was created by Pippin Eira Major, writer, etc. Pippin was born in North Wales and grew up surrounded by sheep and other small mammals. With a shortage of decent human company, he started writing stories. Now an adult, Pippin writes mostly literary fiction, occasionally dabbling in the fantastical and the weird. Pippin is currently looking for representation for 2 literary novels. Hanging Sloth Studios. Hanging Sloth Studios is a Manchester-based podcasting studio. At the moment, the studio is run primarily by Pippin Eira Major, creative lead and sloth-in-chief, with 2 other founding members, Alex Peelable-Richardson and Jessica Jeffrey, as voice actors.
Okay, so I came across this podcast because I was on a podcasting course that was kind of bringing a whole bunch of us podcasters together to kind of provide us with guidance on how to grow our podcast and production and all that sort of stuff. And Pippin's podcast was one of the podcasts selected on there. So it's not something that I came across naturally. It was kind of a podcast I was exposed to by networking. And the premise of it just sounded really interesting. I thought it was a good fit for what we review here as well. We have kind of strayed off audiobooks occasionally. So I think this is the second non-audiobook that we've done. That's correct, isn't it? So what were your kind of initial impressions of it?
Yeah, no, I really loved it. I mean, my first initial impression is the fact that it's so suited to being this audio format because it's about radio. It's like simulating a radio show as well as telling a story. And as is a common theme on these reviews, I love things that are meta. And so that really stood out to me. And I mean, I've since learned listening to some kind of bonus content on there that Pippin did kind of toy with the idea of making this a novel or whatever before settling on the podcast form. And yeah, the fact that this is a podcast that makes it seem like you are listening to a segment on Spirit Box Radio, the mystical thing that is just so cool. So that was the first thing that stood out to me and something that I loved about it the whole way through. So yeah, my overall impressions are that it's fantastic, and thank you very much for introducing me to it. I absolutely devoured it. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, same here really. I mean, the first thing I'd like to say, I don't know, like from the sounds of, when I was hearing Pippin talking about their production podcast, most of the people that were producing podcasts on the course this is like a side hustle that they're doing outside their everyday jobs. And I just want to say, like, just off the top of my head, like the production values here are absolutely superb, very, very professional. This would not be out of place on something like BBC Sounds or Audible, kind of one of the big Audible podcasts that they produce. Like the sound design and
stunning.
Is absolutely stunning. There are a couple of technical nitpicky things that I'll talk about a little bit later on, but just overall, like the sound design and the quality of the performances. So it's basically a full cast performance. I think we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, over 10 performers, and all of them kind of hit it out of the park in the voices that they do. So yeah, so that's kind of like my initial impressions of it. So it's really difficult to talk about like this in any great detail. We're going to try and avoid spoilers wherever we can, but just
Hmm.
spoiler klaxon, spoiler klaxon, spoiler klaxon. There may be season one spoilers involved in our discussion of this because it's really difficult to get to the meat of the story without spoiling some elements of it. Okay, so we kind of start off in the first couple of episodes where Sam has taken over this radio show after the disappearance of Madame Marie, and I really like the kind of central conceit of him reading out these weird letters from
Mm.
like the faithful listeners, and that kind of it acts as that meta thing that you love, where kind of that the
Hmm.
story references something that's not happening within the larger story, which I really enjoyed as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I even have a little note here that it's sort of in some ways, those parts of it feel like a series of short stories.
Yes.
And so obviously just really clever for Pippin to have written those short stories just in themselves, short story writing, but also, like you say, the fact that there's some threads between them that are really cool. But yeah, I think if you're a fan of short stories, you can really appreciate that in this, kind of short story collections, if that's the kind of thing you read and listen to, then yeah, that's really cool. And little sort of mini horror stories, basically. But as well, there are little clues in there as to what the overall story is, what the deal is with Sam, what the deal is with Madame Marie. That's just really, really clever. Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of initially, what I liked about kind of initially is kind of it's not entirely clear whether like the supernatural elements are real or if they're imagined or if it's something in between, and that picture could become slightly clearer as the story progresses as well.
That's fair. I think I'd always taken it as seeing them as true, but there is a big part in it how one of the characters is skeptical of
Yes.
all that kind of stuff. So it is definitely a part in it as to
Yeah, I mean,
what's really going on there and stuff. Yeah.
there's that, and Sam is like always appeared to me as kind of as a somewhat unreliable narrator
Yes, I
as
have that note
well.
down as well.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of the other thing because a lot of it's spoken like just from Sam's not Sam's point of view, but Sam narrates a lot of the stories
Mhm.
himself. So yeah, it's kind of until the other characters came in, I wasn't entirely sure whether it's just like the rantings of someone who's suffering from some sort of delusion or
Oh,
not.
right, okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of the other thing that I kind of had in the back of my head as well.
Yeah, I find it really interesting with that because, so Sam's hosting the show and as part of the show reads letters from the faithful listeners, and very much Pippin, with some great voice acting, does go into not pretending that he's being the voice of the person writing it, but very much adjusts the tone and the performance to suit as if it could be that
Yes.
person, goes really dark and serious when it is dark and serious, and kind of puts emphasis where the writer of the letter would, as opposed to a stranger reading it kind of
Yes.
thing, which I think is really good. But then equally one of my favourite things about it, and this is more so early on, but does happen throughout, is I love how it's like, creepy letter, and
Yeah.
there's all this scary stuff.
Yeah.
Well, guys, wasn't that interesting?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
love it so
Yeah.
much. And that
Yeah.
very much ties in with what you say about the unreliable narrator part, because a lot of stuff is very obvious to us as the listeners that Sam, certainly early on, doesn't see. And it's really clever, that kind of, you have to read between the lines. It's like, I'm not saying it's really obvious to us as a bad thing, but I'm meaning that it's not explicitly acknowledged by Sam, but you can infer it from things where maybe he's missed that, which I thought was really clever. It makes it really fun to listen to as well when you have that kind of engaging thing. And then it's also interesting following Sam's journey to discovering some of those things that kind of maybe we were suspecting further along, and also pointing out to us more clues that we missed as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I want to pick up that you mentioned there is kind of how masterfully this shifts tone from serious and scary to light-hearted and funny to whimsical to treacherous, and from kind of like earnest, like there's like an earnestness that kind of that Sam is a very earnest character, kind of almost naive in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of just runs all the way through. Kind of, I was like doing some fan casting in my head of like, if this was a movie, who would play each character.
Okay,
And like for me, like Sam would be played by like not the actor, but the character Andy Dwyer from Parks and Recs. Is kind of, he's got that same sort of like exuberant energy of like going into stuff. Maybe not the sharpest tool in the box even. Is kind of like there. I know kind of like he's had the character has kind of like suffered trauma that might have affected his like emotional development a little bit. But still, he did kind of make a few decisions that I thought, well, come on, dude, be a little bit more intelligent. I mean, but that's also the horror genre as well. Kind of like maybe not making the most intelligent decisions about things.
That is very fair. Yeah, and I think so. Horror's not a huge genre that I'm massively into. I definitely don't dislike it, but I often don't seek it out.
Yeah.
But I think this is really good. It's sort of, I can see this as sort of gateway horror kind of thing. And I mean that in absolutely no disrespect to it, but partly because of this balance of humour. Even if you're not a horror fan, or even if you really dislike horror, I could still see that you could enjoy this. Because it has some really creepy, sinister stuff, but it also has some really funny stuff, and it also has such a driving story through it that I believe that could probably take you through some of the maybe creepier parts of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I thought on that.
It's funny you say that. Kind of, I see like an odd parallel between this and the Netflix series Midnight Mass.
Okay.
Have you seen that? So I
haven't, no.
No, it's really, really good. So ostensibly, it's Midnight Mass is a vampire story, but it's not really a vampire story, if that makes sense. It's more about how, very much like this story is very much more about kind of like how just different generations of the same family interact with each other, and how families deal with secrets and trauma, and how kind of like the wider community also handles that. And it also explores themes of religion and tradition and being an outsider, which I think are also themes that are very much explored in this as well. So I think we haven't really talked about the characters a lot. Do you want to kind of explain a little bit about, aside from Samuel, there's a whole kind of family involved as well?
Yeah, so Sam's sister Kitty is Kitty the investigator, and has also worked with Madame Marie on the kind of arcane stuff and goes investigating arcane things. And Kitty's, I don't really know how to describe Kitty's personality.
She's very much kind of like she's very much like a go-getter. She'll just rush headfirst into things without considering. I found her a little bit like sarcastic as well at times. So yeah, so she's a very like forceful personality. I found. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I really like Kitty, but I find it hard to put into words what she's about.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then you've also got Anna is another sibling, but as I referenced before, kind of doesn't believe in a lot of what Madame Marie did, and kind of arcane stuff. Maybe has to have that challenged a little bit throughout. Is really protective of Sam,
like overly so. Like,
yes. And yeah, a lot of it is her kind of fighting between the two worlds, kind of the new life that she's built for herself, and also the one with her family and all the stuff that comes with that. As you say, kind of the past and the traumas involved in that, and this whole Spirit Box Radio world, which she distances herself from, where Kitty is very involved, and where Sam is, or has been up until this point, stuck between really wanting to be involved with all that stuff, the opposite to Anna, but not being allowed to, which is explored later on. So yeah, and one thing I maybe should have mentioned when I was talking about the meta stuff as well is that I really loved how this throws you in with the world already created, in that Spirit Box Radio has been going on for ages. This segment has been going on for ages, and you as the listener are tuning in to hear Madame Marie but she's gone and we don't know why. And I thought that was really clever and extremely well done. You weren't sat there thinking, but wait, what the hell happened just then? And you also weren't feeling too overly explained to of, okay, this is the backstory, this is how it happened, this is what you need to know. It's so organic, which is really good.
Really difficult kind of building that sort of like the world building is really well executed in this. You've got a really firm idea of the time and the place and the culture and the type of characters that inhabit this world, where it's not like our planet. Kind of, I think in the world of Spirit Box Radio, I think the impression that at least I got, maybe I got the wrong impression, was that magic is something that's a little bit more accepted, or maybe, I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think
it is a really hard one, isn't it? Because there's sort of talks about, lots of people not believing, and very much the arcanists and the people who tune into Spirit Box Radio and stuff like that are in some senses kind of part of a group of people that's a smaller group in society that is actually believing of this stuff. And so I can therefore see how it could happen in our world. It could be set to be, this is actually going on. But also I can see a sense of it being a different place. And there's some idea of being more open. I guess because I'm not in any circles of, really delving into this kind of thing. I don't know if it feels like it fits within that, or if it feels like it is putting itself as something separate.
I think that's a fair point, actually. I think it's definitely open to interpretation, which is another thing I think is really good about the podcast, is that kind of like there's lots of different ways that you can kind of interpret characters and this and that. I mean, like there was one character that I immediately took against, and that was Oliver the florist. I just immediately, as soon as he opened his mouth, he's a wrong 'un. He's a wrong 'un. We won't go into whether he's a wrong 'un or not, but he definitely kind of has his moments there.
It's so interesting because a lot of people, with me seeing kind of reactions to it and stuff, a lot of people love Oliver. And love the dynamic there. And I'm sort of closer to your end of it in that it makes me a bit uneasy. I'm not sure that I'm as fully on board as everyone else is. And like you say, it is, I guess, with everything, that people will have different responses to it. But this is definitely a kind of thing where it is open for you to make your own judgments on characters. And, like saying how I kind of felt quite drawn to Kitty, but others people might not, and various things like that. And some people might find Sam's bubbly naivety, certainly in the first, section of it, really endearing, and some people might find it annoying.
Find it grating.
It is possible for that, and I think that's basically testament to how well the characters are created, because a 2D character is very easy to have everyone agree on what they're like, whereas a fully formed 3D person of a character, you're going to get different people thinking different things. So I think that's a real advantage to it.
I would agree with that. I mean, so Sam has got like a bit of a crush on Oliver, and I always it just immediately occurred to me that there was kind of like going to be a big age difference between the two, and I always find that quite gross.
I think that's maybe partly why I am also unsure.
Yes, and so that it just made me feel a little bit uncomfortable about that. So I think that's probably, and just kind of the way he talks and stuff like that, kind of I found a little bit grating too. So you kind of mentioned the two sisters and Sam, and Madame Marie is this massive cloud shadow hanging over the family. She is like this dominating force that would push them in kind of like different directions. She doesn't sound like Madame Marie was a particularly good parent, but her disappearance has caused this major void in the family, and it does seem like the family dynamics were slightly dysfunctional even before the disappearance. But I just found the entire story about how different members of the family pulled together and pulled apart and came back together, and then were pulled in all sorts of different directions. Really interesting.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. What other kind of like topics and notes have you got written down?
Yeah, sure. So one thing, a bit while we've been talking about voices and stuff like that, a kind of a small point, but I really felt like Sam reminded me a lot of Rachel Paris. Are you
Oh,
familiar?
yes. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, now I say it, do you hear it?
Yes, yeah, yeah.
I think so the main way that I know Rachel Paris is from the MASH report, which is fantastic. And she does these very much like delivers topics in a overly sarcastic way, as in delivers them as if they're sincere and they're obviously not parodied ways, and has a very distinctive voice in how she does that, and it's always really chirpy and cheery even when it's really dark. And I guess it kind of links back to that thing of, you know, the dark spooky letters, and then, well, wasn't that fun? I think those are the times when it really pulled through to me. But just as a small note, I think if you really enjoy Rachel Paris and her segments on MASH report, then certainly the beginning sections of this podcast you'll be a fan of, because it had so many just links with that. I couldn't get it out of my head in a really, really good way.
It is great that you've pointed that out, because I was trying to think, what does this remind me of? And you've hit exactly the nail on the head. So that's kind of exactly correct. So I'd agree with that. And it's actually probably worth talking about. Kind of all the siblings they've got different voices. So Kitty, well, how would you describe Kitty's accent?
I don't know for sure, but yes, again, a distinctive voice, which is very helpful for audio.
Yeah.
We've spoken about this before, I think, that being able to tell the characters apart with distinctive voices is extremely important. And you definitely can. You know which sister's talking to Sam because of their voices. And especially on this, you've got like people call in to the radio, and you can tell who it is from that, certainly, especially when it's Kitty or Anna. And even without people having to introduce themselves, it's really clear. So I think that's really good in that sort of technical sense, but also really nice voices to listen to. But I don't know for sure about accents.
But I mean, there's kind of a big difference between Sam, Kitty, and Anastasia's voice, because Anastasia's got very much a posh, professional, lawyerly voice, and which I think is kind of like a byproduct of the career that she's chosen to follow. And I just found that,
as you are able to say,
I think that, and I've also thought that kind of created an interesting dynamic between when the siblings were having conversations with each other as well. So
no, definitely.
Okay, I just want to really quickly mention, I think who's basically my favorite character, which was the Bog Witch. I absolutely kind of like love this. She sounded like a creature that just had absolutely no patience for any human beings. Just kind of, she was like fed up with humanity. For most of the other like arcanists were complete idiots, and the only thing she had time for was really the mud. Yeah, which I thought was absolutely both hilarious and entertaining.
Oh yeah, no, definitely a really big character, even though it's a relatively minor part in terms of plot. Yeah. And maybe kind of time, but a really character that really sticks with you, and really interesting character. And again, amazing voice. There's some more on the bonus content where you can hear the voice actor switching from kind of their regular voice into the right idea voice, which is really quite funny. So it really gives you a picture of the person, I think.
I think it really does. And again, I think, as you mentioned it, if this was like a TV show or something like this, you'd have to have like a visual representation of that character, and I think it just works a lot better when you don't know what some of these people look like, because you can just use like the theater of the mind, as it was, to create your own.
Oh, definitely. And like possibly for making the horror work well as well, because I feel that with visual horror you often either it looks naff. There's been a few horror films that I've watched that are just, it's not convincing enough to be scary. It's just laughable. And or potentially in other ways, you might really put off a section of the would become viewership that I was talking about before, that maybe isn't massive horror fans but love everything else about the story, if the visuals were so effective that it was really scary, so I think that's another reason why the audio works really well for that, letting your mind fill in those gaps. But as you said before, the use of sound design is absolutely incredible for building atmosphere. The kind of music and stuff that's used in the backgrounds is really good for
the music is
timing.
great,
Yeah, the timing of just various sound effects, things breaking, the cats meowing and things like that.
We haven't talked about the cats yet, have we?
Oh, we will. And also, like we talked about with our audiobook of the year, True Crime Story, the effects on voices, for example, if they're calling into the radio, the fact that they sometimes sound a bit staticky, as if they're on, a cheap phone calling in through loads of different systems before they're being played out loud onto the radio thing. You know what I mean? That's really, really clever, really well done, and properly builds that experience and the images in your mind.
Yeah, I think it probably. I probably should talk a little bit about like some of the criticisms I've got for the audio design. So I think occasionally when it was like the phone calls coming in and it was Sam just presenting the radio show, I found it was fine. It's just when the characters, Sam, Kitty, and Anastasia, when they're in the same room together, it didn't really sound like they were in the same room together. You could kind of tell, kind of like they were maybe using different mics or different studio setups. I could kind of like tell, like it just didn't feel like they were all in the same place in some of those scenes. And I could also kind of notice odd little bits of like, I don't know what's the right, not distortion, but kind of, you could tell kind of like some of the voices had been remastered a little bit too much as well. But that was kind of like very, very rare throughout it. But apart from that, I think I felt like technically it was really, really, really good. It was just kind of like those few scenes where all the characters were supposed to be in the same place, and I never really thought that.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah, and I think it is definitely something where we are aware that this is a podcast project that has been, independently made and
made during lockdown, I think, as well. So
exactly. That's what I was going to go on to. The kind of the fact that they are having to record remotely. A lot of the cast not having met each other and stuff like that. It's certainly all those things that you said are very much forgivable, and I think it depends on how, I guess, in some ways, how experienced with audio you are, and if you also do audio production in the sense of making a podcast or working in it or whatever, that you might pick up on that. And I think anything that you do notice is fully forgivable, and a lot of stuff you probably wouldn't even notice, and I think all made up for by the performances that are underneath that quality and all those intentional sound changes, like the effects in the music and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's just kind of like me being ultra nitpicky.
Yeah. That's what we do on this podcast. It's fine. So, I mean, like I was on the Terry Pratchett one. So
I mean, just ultra nitpicky. So I think we've kind of talked. We haven't really done that many spoilers. We haven't kind of really got into the plot, but I would say overall, it starts off as like an investigative story, kind of like Sam trying to figure out what's happened to his mother, and then slowly the horror elements start revealing themselves, and the mystical. So it does become a lot more horror-ish towards the end of the series than it is kind of at the beginning. But as we I think both mentioned at the start, there is that kind of like, it does go masterfully, is able to change its tone from being lighthearted, building in humorous elements, romantic elements, family tension elements seamlessly. And that is like, that's like, as someone who writes stories and has watched and listened to a lot of media, that's such a difficult thing to do. I mean, it really, really is. So kind of like really hats off to like the production team for kind of like making that happen. I don't know if there's anything else like you want to pick up on in your notes.
Yeah, I do actually. I mean, I have a few more things to talk about, but also on stuff that you've said. Let's work backwards. So you're talking about the how difficult it is to write, and certainly, and talking as someone who doesn't write, the reason I don't is because of how difficult things like that are. I very much love stories and do think I have a good sense of what works and what doesn't in a story, and that's why I don't write, because I'm never happy that anything I write works. But I feel like I do have good skills of pointing out what doesn't work in other people's, and hopefully helping them improve that is sort of where I feel my skills lie. But exactly, I'm completely in awe that Pippin can write that story. It's just unbelievable. This is kind of related to that, but me emphasizing I'm not saying in any ways that I could write this. It really reminded me a lot of basically my childhood of playing make-believe games. You know, so a lot of the time with my sister, a lot of the time with friends at school, and just all the time we were always playing games that involved making characters, making stories, and it was that kind of role play where the story develops as you go along really organically and kind of like improv, basically. I mean, I did a lot of drama, as did my sister with me when I was a kid, and some of the friends that I played with. It definitely feeds from that sort of thing, that kind of someone introduces a new element to the story and you take it and you run with it and you build that world together. And I loved doing that as a kid so much. I remember being really sad going to high school when people would kind of spend their break times just chatting rather than playing make-believe games, because that's what I always did and what I absolutely loved. And this story really took me back to that. And this is in absolutely no way negative. I'm not saying it's like a kid wrote it, or it feels like he just made it up as he went along and added new bits in, or whatever. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just meaning it had that real feel of that sort of world-building, immersive stories, creativeness that I spent a lot of my childhood doing, and especially a lot of these topics reminded me of a particular friend of mine that we did this with a lot, and I've actually recommended the podcast to her to listen to because it really screamed, you know, her kind of thing. And that's possibly partly why it reminded me so much, because some of the story games that we'd come up with together feel a lot like this. But yeah, that's sort of connected to the writing. I'm not in any way saying I could have written that kind of thing, but the story that was written for it made me feel a lot like that, really felt reminiscent of that, and I thought that was a really wonderful thing. So the other things that you'd said before that about how it's written to build up in that horror stuff, the creepy stuff like that, because it really does start off being really funny. You know, we talked about the kind of Rachel Paris kind of jokey stuff. There are a lot of jokes in it. Sometimes they kind of start it off just before the sort of credits part, I guess, is what you think if you think of it in sort of a American TV show kind of thing, the cold open kind of thing. There's some funny things like that. There's a couple I noted down that was kind of like, you know, if you stare into the void, well, it's going to stare back. It's going to think it's very rude. And there was one that was about, you know, the early bird gets the worm, but the early worm gets eaten, kind of thing. You know, there's some really, really funny, jokey bits in it. And I think I'd make the point that if you are feeling you're put off by the fact that it gets spooky and stuff later, I'm saying this with my mum in mind. I know she listens and I know she doesn't like horror stuff. So I guess I'm pitching it to her. But if you're thinking you're not going to enjoy that bit, then listen to the beginning bits. And if it gets to that point, you can stop. And I think that's way better than cheating yourself out of listening to any of it.
Yeah.
Because you're worried about that. Because, yeah, I think if you really like the tone and stuff of the beginning of it, then it's worth listening to it for that, even if you don't stick with it. And maybe you'll decide, actually, I'm so invested in these characters that I do want to stick with it. So I think that's an important point to make on it as well.
And I think the other thing about it is it's not like a gory horror story. A lot of the stakes is basically about like Sam's mental and emotional well-being rather than his physical well-being, and that's kind of like the major stake. That's kind of like that runs through the story. So yes, there's kind of like some physical jeopardy that some of the characters may face, but that's at the heart of why we care what happens to Sam. Is we care about Sam because we want Sam to be okay, which is kind of like the key thing there.
Yeah, it's very much, you know, psychological horror. You know, it does also have the fact of there are some evil things that also have magic, and therefore that's pretty scary. But yeah, the psychological horror stuff as well. And I think it's therefore important to note that it isn't just for the sake of it either, and it's that kind of magical thing that fantasy, horror, sci-fi, all those genres do, as well as stories in general, but specifically those genres, which is showing us our lives with a filter over of something else that maybe we can use as escapism, or maybe we can use to see those things in a new light. However you use it is totally valid, but that there is some kind of reflection of real life issues in there. I think a large thing is that there is a real metaphor, again talked about in a bit of the bonus content, between the house and what the house represents.
Yes.
And trauma being associated with place, that is really interesting. There was also, getting a bit personal again, but Sam talks about he can't get rid of this feeling that he just wants to go home, even when he's at home. And that is something I have certainly felt before. And I haven't actually, I don't believe, heard it or read it or seen that particular feeling expressed in fiction before, or from anyone else before. And so, yeah, without getting too deep, it really meant a lot to me, actually, that very specific feeling of, I want to go home, but I am home, was in there. Yeah, that really touched with me.
Yeah, I think it's always lovely when you kind of hear someone, it's kind of like me and the Penguin story that we reviewed. I wasn't expecting to get that hit of like emotion from that story. So it's always nice to kind of like when you discover something that scratches a particular itch. So that I'm really glad that you found that in this story. Have you got any other kind of like notes you want to cover? Because there's one other criticism I want to make about the podcast.
You can start with that if you want.
Yeah, sure. So I think it was maybe 3 or 4 episodes too long.
Right.
I think they could have edited such a considerable out. I just felt like it strung along a few strands that could have been condensed a little bit more, and I think they could have cut some fat out of the story. So it just makes me think. I know it's great to have like agency over your own storytelling, but it does make me think. If with a different editor or producer in line, if they could have streamlined some of the elements a little bit more there. So that's kind of like, how did you feel about kind of like the pacing in general and stuff like that? Because that's kind of, I think, maybe where my criticism is coming from. I felt it could have moved along a little bit faster. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I think I felt the pacing was all right. I think I do get what you mean, though, and sort of towards the end, maybe more of it is Sam is learning loads of stuff. He's finding out what's happened. He's putting the pieces together. And maybe in some cases there's a lot of us hearing him make those realizations that is maybe partly what drags out some of those bits near the end of season 1.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think you make a good point that no matter how amazing a writer is, a fresh pair of eyes from an outside perspective that's thinking, okay, how is someone not in your head going to receive this is always a really valuable thing, for sure. So yeah, I can definitely see how you mean on that. But yeah, actually, overall on pacing, I was quite pleased with it. I think
I think it's just towards the end I felt that, okay, come on, let's get going, let's go.
Yeah, that's fair.
Come on. Yeah
But I guess in defense of that, I was really loving it. As I've said, I really blasted through it. And I know we are only reviewing season 1, but I couldn't help myself listening to more. And so in that sense, I can certainly be happy that there was more rather than less. For more to listen to.
Yeah, so that's definitely a fair point. You had like a couple of more notes you wanted to discuss, I think.
Yeah, I did. So, well, firstly, you'd said to mention about the cats.
Yes.
So, yeah, there's cats in it. The named cats are Revel, Eggroll, and Cosmo. We also have a cat called Cosmo.
Names. Yeah.
They are good, strong names. We have a cat called Cosmo. We named Cosmo because I was reading a Gwyneth Reese book called Cosmo and the Magic Sneeze with a black cat with a white tip on his tail. And then we got Cosmo, who is a black cat with a white tip on his tail. So we named him Cosmo. So yes, that was really cute. And yeah, I really like that. You've got these cats provide a real emotional support for Sam. You also have a lot of stray cats that are unnamed as well that are in there, so they're really cool. And also some elements of moving the story along. in some ways the kind of, you've got that kind of cat intuition kind of thing, and the way that the cats kind of mew at Sam and stuff like that, it makes what is in some senses a very monologue thing, it helps to break those moments up into a bit of dialogue.
Yeah.
Talking with someone, not just to someone. That's really cool.
Yeah, and I think the Sam's cats do play a fairly major role in the story at points, kind of like kind of, especially in terms of like there's a point where we're not too sure if like Sam is turning into a crazy cat person.
Yeah.
But no, like the cats do kind of also move along some of the supernatural elements as well. So it's kind of a useful thing to kind of have in there as another kind of like layer to kind of consider in the story.
Yeah, definitely.
And what was the last thing that you wanted to?
Oh, we say
mention?
last, but I'm going to look through that
Yeah.
stuff and see what else I had. One thing about this, that you might have got this impression with us talking, but I feel like it is, I'm trying to think of the right term for this, but a very much a fandom-y type thing.
Yes.
It really lends itself to fandom. And I think there's a lot of, reasons behind that. There's a lot in this, audio drama that is really about community. The segment that it's, replicating is called the Advice and Community segment. There are forums that are a huge part of the plot. A lot of those letters calling in are actually like forum posts. And also, of course, the LGBTQ plus representation and the idea of community behind that, I think, is a really big lender to it. And like I said about Weird Gods, it's that kind of feel, as it feels quite Tumblr-y, and not saying that in a bad way at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is very much that. I feel like it's that kind of community. But having said that, if you don't feel that's you don't in any way feel excluded from it, Like, you can write a load of fanfic for it. You can join the Discord server and be really prominent in that. You can, cosplay. You can go really fandom on it, come up with theories, while you're listening along. What do you think's happening? What's that? And you can go really hard in on it, but you can also not. I think it's a really good thing where it definitely has that feel to it. It definitely lends itself to that, but you don't feel like you have to participate in all those things in order to be a fan of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, actually, because there are kind of like, especially with things like Star Wars and like Lord of the Rings and kind of like all these sort of things, like kind of that you've got the gatekeeping fans where, if you don't know this, if you're not on the forums, if you haven't got the t-shirt. And I think this is the sort of story that you can just, you can go and like, meet other people and on the forums and discuss it and stuff. We can just enjoy it for what it is, which I think is also really nice as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, definitely. Another little thing was another little comparison thing. So one of the funny, jokey bits about it, but in some ways actually gets quite serious, is that as part of the Advice and Community segment, there are augury forecasts. And some of these are quite funny in their specificity. So sort of, if you're walking down the street on a Tuesday, make sure to take your raincoat kind of thing in an absurdly specific way. And if you're talking to a person named Charles, then this, that kind of thing that I think can be quite funny. And so it's sort of a recommending both ways, basically. If you listen to one of these, you might enjoy the other. There is a podcast that I really love called Erin is the Funny One, and it's made by YouTuber Jax Films and his wife Erin. And it's really, really funny. I love it so much. They do like fun quizzes and also just chatting, and they're just both really funny people. But one of the things that they do is they have a horoscopes segment where they both make up really ridiculously specific horoscopes and read those out. And it's super funny. And you kind of have two sides, because Jack doesn't believe in anything horoscope related whatsoever. Erin sort of does have an interest in it, certainly, but they both take the piss out of it equally and in really funny ways. And they then started doing a bit where they did it like, I think it's Mad Libs, where they would write it but with gaps and then ask the other person to put in, give me an adjective, give me this, and it made the story really funny. And basically they each read each other's out, so they make each other say stupid stuff.
Yeah.
And it's so wonderful hearing them both break at each other's jokes, especially because, one makes comedy for a living on YouTube, and the other doesn't, and yet Erin is the funny one. It's really fantastic. So yeah, that was kind of a big tangent, but the sort of, if you enjoy those little bits in Spirit Box Radio with the potentially could be kind of farcically funny specific augury forecasts, then check out Erin is the funny one. It is really good. Equally, if you like that section, then that's just another reason to give this a go. It's really cool.
I think we could probably talk about this for at least another 30-40 minutes. So I think we should probably wrap up. I really enjoyed this. I think it's a great, really superb audio drama. I mean, it's won 2 awards already, and kind of really well done, Pippin. Sometimes you meet people on these things and they kind of like expose you to stuff that you end up really enjoying. So thank you to Pippin for being on that course with me. And this is really good. So if you're into your supernatural stuff, or if you're interested in kind of like audio dramas that kind of like are a little bit meta and play around with like different ideas around different storytelling methods and being referential to the so I really enjoyed it. So
Oh, completely agree. Loved it. Yeah, thank you to you for recommending it and passing the thanks back along the chain for introducing you to it. It's fantastic. It's really good. I hope people give it a go. I listened to it in really quick succession. I was really enjoying it. I listened to this over other stuff that I was listening to, other audiobooks I've got on the go. This was what I was wanting to listen to. I guess we haven't really spoken that it's also in like, there's a bit of variation, but it's sort of 15 to 20 minute.
Yes, that's what I was about to say. Yeah. I mean, with the exception of a couple of the later ones, which are a little bit longer than that, most of them are between 15 and 20 minutes. So it's perfect for, it's not perfect for a tube journey, because I tried to listen to this on the tube, and like, you really need to pay attention to the episode. So kind of, if there's any like ambient sound, I think this is definitely one of those ones where you do kind of like maybe need to take 15-20 minutes at lunch to kind of listen to an episode, rather than a noisy train carriage or something like that, because you will miss out on some of the subtleties, and it's quite, the sound design can be kind of quite dense, and you do need to be paying attention to a few things as well.
I also find it really interesting that you say that, because I in some ways had it a separate way. I mean, I totally with you about the sounds, I think, and especially if you don't have the sort of headphones that are going to block your external noise out, then it would be a shame to miss on those sounds. But in some ways, I felt, and maybe this is partly why, not the main reason I was just loving it and really invested, but maybe partly why I was picking it over some stuff, because although, yes, like you say, you do want to listen to the details, there are definite like clues in there that you don't necessarily want to miss. I personally felt like I didn't have to give 1,000% attention on this one.
I was the opposite.
This is weird, especially because this is both of us going a bit against our natural grain, really. But I sort of listened to some of this while I was, playing some video games and stuff like that. And I don't know if maybe it's partly because, I've just been a bit restless, and I've wanted something to occupy my hands and my eyes while I've been listening. I listened to some at work, which, I work in audio. We have been told we're allowed to listen while we work. It's encouraged. But sometimes I can't. Sometimes there's like books that I don't want to listen to while I'm focusing on work, because I want to, hear every word. And equally, sometimes I turn anything off because it's just a bit distracting. But I felt like this one, I was sort of happy to have it, not in the background, but with other stuff going on, because it felt easier to listen to. And I also think that's maybe one of the differences with the kind of different content that we talk about between the air quotes written word being read or performed to you versus something where it's being spoken to you, which obviously with this mimicking radio is what this is. And genuinely, you picked out the same word that I did, but in a different way. Because of that, it isn't as dense. It's not like if you're listening to a really long audiobook where basically all the sentences are fully packed and they lead from one to the next, because it is very much more loose, you're being spoken to, and I felt, that meant that I could be more relaxed in my listening to it without worrying that I was missing something.
I'm at the completely opposite end of the spectrum there. I was quite tense through some of it, and I was thinking, all right, what does that sound mean? And the inflection in the voices, and am I missing something out there? And why is that kind of like the train rattling at that bit? I'm gonna have to go back and rewind and see if I missed something. So it's interesting how we I think it's quite interesting.
It really is. And it's maybe partly because I guess that's sounding more like you're doing that sort of investigative, where are all the clues? I want to find them all kind of thing.
I think so, yeah.
Whereas I think I definitely can do that in some stuff. But for this, maybe just, circumstance of how I'm listening to it at the moment, or maybe it's something about how it is written or whatever and how that affects me. Yeah. I was happy to be taken along for the journey, Okay. I really love that there are a lot of stuff that, you can pick up and you can go, oh, maybe that's going to be interesting later. Or you can go, Sam, what the hell? Why are you missing that? That's so obvious. But I wasn't overly desperate about checking off everything, and I think it'd be really interesting. So, because Pippin even recommends, again, bonus content of go back and re-listen, and there'll be stuff that you missed because it was plotted out for the future. And I think I'm really looking forward to doing that and going, I missed that, but in that sort of I didn't pick it up the first time way, and it being really clever rather than having to pick it out the first time, And like we've spoken before about the replayability of a lot of books, haven't we, I think?
Yeah.
And, a lot of the time I want to dedicate myself to the book I'm listening to, because I know there are so many books out there, I'm just not going to listen to it again.
Yeah.
So if I relax and miss a bit, I've missed it forever. Yeah. So I better pay attention the first time round, because in all likelihood, I'm not going to sit for another 20 hours and listen to it again. Yeah. There's too much other stuff out there. Whereas I think this, I would be happy to go back to again, partly, because of that pull of, what did I miss that I didn't see the first time, because it's really cleverly intertwined. And also just, it was really enjoyable to have on.
Yeah. So I think that's a fair point. I think we're reaching the same conclusion, but from some kind of slightly different approaches.
Anyway, that was my summary.
So thank you to Pippin for bringing this into our lives. That's a bit strong. Guys, please support the podcast by subscribing and leaving a review wherever you find it. You can leave a tip in the tip jar, which is in the episode description. And if you want to send us an email with recommendations or any comments, it's audiobookishpod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and in exciting news, please tune in to the next episode, because we'll actually be talking to the writer and creator of Spirit Box Radio, Pippin Eira Major. That's a really exciting guest to have on for us.
Yeah, definitely.
Any final words, Poppy?
No, I think I've said plenty, but yes, definitely recommend. And thank you so much.
Okay, cool. We'll leave a link to Spirit Box Radio in the episode description so you can go and check it out. Okay, thanks guys. See ya. Bye.
Bye.